So, good afternoon, guys. I want to talk to you about Final Portfolio for a bit. So, I'm not going to go in super into depth and read everything to you. There's plenty of information that I've tried to write out for you guys to give you as much guidance as possible. But I do want to talk about the sample that I built for you guys and the specifications around switching the platform from what was going to be a physical portfolio, which is now going to be a Google Slide presentation. Now, these choices are not easy. This is not exactly the same as what we'd be doing in the classroom, but given the limitations, I think it's pretty damn close. So we'll try to work through this the best we can, and I'll be pretty lenient for the most case. The things I won't be lenient on are the number of images that I expect from you guys, because up to before the point we were even not meeting, there were plenty of images you guys already had. So the 20 to 30 images is I'm still going to be pretty strict on. Now 20 to 30 is a pretty big window. 20 is a pretty low amount. 30 is pretty high. If you can aim for somewhere in between, that's pretty ideal. You're going to have a little bit more flexibility too, because typically in a physical portfolio, we don't want to rotate back and forth between horizontal images and vertical images. But since we are dealing with a digital format, we can easily kind of format these in pretty easy to read ways. So I'm not too worried about that anymore, which would be pretty nice for you guys to get some more flexibility in general. Now, under portfolio specifications, and if you're not sure where to find this on Canvas, it's down right below the weekly uploads, Final Portfolio. So, Final Portfolio specifications. So, I kind of go into summarizing the small things that I just said. Here's the link to the portfolio, which we'll look at in just a moment. And then the actual technical things and specifications that I would like you to complete just to make this an organized process. So basic things are picking a background color that are going to be achromatic, and that's anything between black and white. So for mine, I just chose a pretty even gray. So in the background right here, anything on this first line will be perfectly fine. Now black is okay, and I'll kind of give a quick overview on like why these are okay things. So black is fine, right? Because it's nice and clean. My problem with black is the range of contrast that it provides in your image. So typically this makes everything a lot brighter looking. So if you already have really dark images, so maybe this might work for you, Brooke, since you prefer dark images. This might work really well for you because it'll let those bright areas stand out and let those dark areas really have some nuance. Now for my images, I tend to be kind of in the middle tone range, maybe middle to dark. So that's why I choose something a little more on the light to white range. So, I mean, you can see these all reveal a little bit more, or a little bit less, but they all going to give you some kind of clean look. White is a very clear, obvious. The reason I don't recommend absolute white is if you have images that have maybe some bright areas in the top right corner. Go back to white. Right? This isn't absolute white, but you can get the idea. It might bleed off a little bit. So typically we'll be avoiding that anyways. So most of you shouldn't have that problem regardless. So I've been hopefully drilling that into your brains yet by now. But a good safe pick is always going to be kind of a light gray. And that's my preference because it's easier on the eyes than absolute bright white. And it actually adds a little bit of contrast to some of those darker hues and shades. So that's my reasoning for that type of background color. I want a title page. So this is perfectly fine. So your name, the year, and the semester, a quick title. It doesn't have to be anything super profound, just Final Portfolio, best of me, my best, whatever you want to call it. You can have fun with it. You can name it whatever the hell you want. If you want to name it Ghibli Giblets, Goldfish Crackers, One Fish, Two Fish, Red Fish, potato, any of those, perfectly fine. I don't really care. Have fun with it if you want to. Just give it a title so I know what it is. And then finally the name of the class, and this is just going to be same for everybody. So ART 243, Introduction to Photography. This will just help me in the future. So probably going to keep a lot of these for samples, especially next semester is probably going to be slated for online. There's a possibility of that, so I want to just make sure I have some samples for other people other than mine. So please do that for me if you don't mind. Image layout should be really clean. And I kind of go into this a little bit. Just simple, clean images should be filling the page as much as possible. Now this is a 16:9 ratio layout, so when we go to present, it fits to my screen. So you don't have to crop your photographs to this exact size because our images come out at 2:3 ratio, which does not equal the 16:9 when you scale it out. So if you want to crop your images to fit that, that's perfectly fine. That is open to you to do. But if you want to keep the original ratio of your image because the crop in the image is the way you like it, but I mean, just slap it in the middle and leave a little bit of space on all sides. Now again, you say you have some flexibility in this because you can put some verticals next to each other if you want. You can even change the scaling of some of these images, so you can do a kind of cropped horizontal next to a vertical. Again, have fun with this, but make sure it just looks nice and clean. So a little bit of space all the way around so it looks okay. Make sure it's even on all sides. And don't just slap a bunch of images kind of willy-nilly on top of each other. I don't want a pile of images on every slide. Maybe no more than 2 or 3 per slide, honestly. And I also don't want them to be appearing super duper small like this, okay? I mean, if you want to make sure, if you want to play with something, maybe, I'm just futzing around now. If you want to play with something kind of odd and strange, where you're kind of making a spatial relationship, that's okay. But I don't want them to be small just so you can fit more on one slide. So again, there's some flexibility as long as things have purpose. So we'll have some rough drafts of these before we get to the final, so we can always talk about that. So if you want to try some stuff, try it on your rough draft, and then you can get some feedback on it. For the most part, just make it clean and simple. Image dimensions are going to be no different than what we've been doing on your blogs. So 2,000 pixels wide at 72 to 150 dpi. And those are going to fit in perfectly fine on your Google Slides perfectly well and look pretty nice. You don't want to make them too large, otherwise the file size of your Google slide when you hand it to me is just going to be fucking enormous. So I don't want 2 gigabytes Google Slides. I'd like them to be reasonable. So if all your images are sized correctly, this shouldn't be any more than, let's say, 100 megabytes, 200 megabytes at the very, very most. So that's what I'm kind of aiming for. Again, I'm not going to be super strict on the file sizes, but if it's super duper large and it takes me forever to download, I don't know, I might say something, but at that point it'll probably be fine. So just be aware of that, and it'll help loading times for you too when you're playing around with them. And finally, just label and number your images. So mine's really small and subtle. I just have a little number in the bottom right corner of most of the images. Again, it might depend on how you lay things out. So in some of these, like this one, the gutter here is just a little too small, so I just put them on left and right. Again, as long as it makes sense. And that's really not for me to figure out how many images you have. It does help that too. But when we go to reference these during critique, we can easily say, hey, I think you should move image 23 next to the number 27. I just think that'll look better in terms of color harmony and composition. So we can easily just make a quick adjustment and move that down there, right? So that's just something that'll help us kind of communicate on a little easier way, because we can't just point to things because we're not in person anymore. So those are the basic specifications on how I want you to create this and how to organize this. And that's kind of all laid out right here if you have any questions about that at all. If you're not familiar with what Google Slides is, it's essentially a much better version of PowerPoint in my opinion. I like the tools, I like the way they're laid out, they're simple, you can kind of create anything you want to. And if you already have a Google Drive or a Gmail account, you can directly insert all your images from your drive by just dropping and dragging and dropping. So we've got all these up here, which is perfectly great. I can pull from anything I have on my drive or shared drives or anything like that and just do whatever I need to. So there's that. So ease and accessibility is going to be really nice. In addition to that, you can share them really easily too. So we can go to File Share, which is what you'll be doing when you want to send it to me. And you're just going to send it either to davitap@uwgb.edu or my Gmail, paydnavita@gmail.com. Okay? It might be easier to do it on Gmail. You can send it to both if you want to. I'll find it either case, but you're going to send it to me. Now we'll probably be doing some sharing to other classmates as well, so we'll probably want to make these public at certain points. So when we go to share, we can go to advanced right here, and we can change this to public. We can also just share it to anyone with a link. So if you don't want anybody and everybody to be able to access it, that's fine. As long as you give us a link on one of these discussion posts when we get there, that'll be perfectly fine as well. So if you didn't catch that, it's under File, Share, Advanced in the bottom right corner, and then you're going to change who has access to it. So as long as you give us a link, we'll be able to look at it, or we can just do it on public, and that way it'll be easy to kind of pass it around. And that's pretty simple and pretty cool, all straight together forward. So that's how I want you guys to build it. Yeah. So let's talk about how I'm making some decisions and how should we be thinking about putting this together. I don't want you to just put 20 to 30 images in no order whatsoever. I did think about the ordering of these, and if you're looking through this or have looked through this already, maybe you've already deciphered some of those decisions, but I want to talk about a few of them here just to give you an idea of what I'm looking at when I look at yours and how you can start to put together ideas for yourself when you are ordering these out. So the strength of kind of building a portfolio like this is, one, it's required at some point. If you ever move forward with a photo job, people are going to say, hey, can I see some images? And what they really mean by that is send them a portfolio. So a collection of images, either on a website, Google slide presentation like this. In the past, it was a physical book of photos or a little portfolio clamshell box. That's more traditional. Those are nicer to handle. When you go to an interview in person, it does add a nice little touch. So those are things to consider when you're doing this. But for now, this is just going to be really good practice for you to build sequences and series of images together in really cohesive manners to keep the attention of reviewers, or in your case, future employers. So that's why we're doing this. And really, this is going to start focusing on not just the individual image. It's going to be focusing on the collection of images. So one image says quite a bit, and we've only really ever talked about images in a singular sense. We've looked at images from each of you, talked about them in critique, sometimes talked about a few, but never really in a relationship to each other. I think a few times I've brought up and compared a few images, but really not that frequently. So we're going to start comparing images back and forth, figuring out what this image says about this image, so on and so forth. And, you know, if you're starting to look through images and realize they don't say anything next to each other, then you need to create more. And that's what the last end of this really semester is going to be about, is when you put together your final draft or your first draft of your portfolio, there's probably going to be some gaps, and that's expected. So we're really going to work on filling those gaps, what images you need to put there, what kind of things we should look for in terms of, do I need some more color harmony images, do I need some better compositions, do I need something more focused on movement or motion, do I need something with wider spaces, do I need something that is flatter or more 2D, do I need more still life objects, do I need more portraits? You know, these are all options to think about. So there's a lot of decision making to be made here, and I'll be helping you make these decisions along the way, and so will your peers. So don't feel like you're totally alone having to figure this out by yourself, but the first draft you will. So the first draft, I want you to kind of play around with these ideas and get it to somewhere you think you like, and then we'll be mulling it over pretty much for a week or two before we really go into and look at the final versions. So there's two really big ways to think about how you want to transition images, and for the most part, you want to try to do both, but we haven't really talked about the second side of this yet, and we really won't. So I'm not asking you to really consider it that much. So the first half of this is going to be thinking about the images in aesthetic properties. So aesthetics being color, light, composition, shapes, sizes, scale, you know, the things that make up an image and make them look good, which is really all we've been really talking about. Every single one of your technical assignments has built up one of these ideas so you can use it in the future. So everything that we've talked about so far are aesthetic principles, right? The basic aesthetics of art, color, shape, form, line, perspective, etc., are things that you can focus on and make relationships between. And these are things that I've kind of looked at within this portfolio of images too. The other half of this would be conceptual comparisons. So conceptual comparisons could be the act of looking, right? So maybe you have one image of someone that's looking from left to right, then another image looking from right to left, and in some way between the two images, they almost look like they're looking at each other, okay? So in a way, you're kind of formulating an idea that there's a thing actually happening between the images, that within the gutter of the images, okay, the gutter meaning the space in between, that there's a thing happening, that your subject is looking left, and then the subject is looking right, and that there's something happening in between, you know? And maybe there's a third image in between those two people looking into the center that gives you an idea of what they're trying to think about or what's going on. So that starts to build up a different concept, a larger narrative, a bigger story. If you want to start doing those things, please do, okay? They can be really fun when you start to put images together, and they can also really engage the viewer in a much deeper way. But for now, since this is just the introduction to photography class, and we're really only talked about aesthetics, that's what I actually want you to focus on. So if you're feeling brave and you feel like you got a lot of images that you can build an idea like that on, go for it, really. And I'm only going to encourage you to do that more. So if you think you want to do that, just mention that when we do our final drafts or our first drafts of our final portfolio, and we can kind of talk about those ideas and make them a little bit bigger. But let me just walk through a couple of these images and move you through my thoughts on why I'm doing it that way. And then you can kind of put together those ideas for yourself. So the first image should always kind of be one of your stronger images. And this is really hard sometimes to pick for yourself because we're all really personally attached to really specific images that do things that we really enjoy. But this really isn't about you. This is about getting people other than you engaged in your work. So I've chosen this image as my first image because almost every single time I take images, I go to my fiance Lydia and I say, hey, which one of these do you like the most? And she just loved this image. She thought it was such a great photograph of our dog in this space. This is the kind of the field we take our dog to quite often to go play around in, so she finds all kinds of weird things in here. So she felt that this was really personal to her in some way. She really enjoyed the space and the comparison of the dog to the space. So I don't know, it got a good reaction from her, and that's kind of why I'm picking it out. So your first image should be one of your strongest. And if you're not sure which one of those images for you is the strongest, this is where you can start to get ideas from your peers. So think about in the past during critiques or which discussions we've had online about when you've got the best feedback. Which images have you gotten the most positive or strongest criticism from? And maybe that can help you select what you think the best image might be. Now, if you're still not sure after kind of considering those things, just put in your favorite first. And again, I'll give you feedback on what I think your favorite or your best images are and where you can kind of restart those things. But once you have a starting point, you can then start to transition. And it's really important that you just pick a starting point. So that's why I say pick your best image, and that's always a good starting point because your best image is probably going to be your most engaging for the viewer to start with. So when I start my first image, I'm looking at this, and I want to try to decide what's good about it, right? So compositionally, there's a good triangular shape, I think, happening between the base of these kind of weedy things going on down here and the shape that it kind of creates right here between some of these other lines and the dog in the middle. So there's a strong triangle in the middle, kind of maybe a three-point perspective or a three-point or a multi-point or spot composition going on. There's also some strong light coming from the background, coming into the foreground here. So there's a kind of a backlit kind of aesthetic going on. In terms of color and harmony, there's a kind of blue-red thing going on. So it's kind of a dyadic. So those are all things to consider in terms of moving forward. There's also a little bit of green and orange, maybe a triadic. So these are all things I'm just kind of picking out to think, okay, I can look for those things in the next image. So I transition to this one. So if we're looking at this kind of a similar way, there's a singular triangular shape happening. So there's a very similar composition, right? And if I go back and forth a few times, you can see that the structure of these branches kind of appear in the same spot. So automatically this image is sharing the same compositional structure as the previous one. Subject-wise, it's the same field and the same weeds, so there's some linkage there. It's also the same light. It's the same kind of light coming from the background, coming to the foreground. So we can even kind of think of this as like a cinematic film. If you look at the opening shots of any film or any kind of sequence, there's usually a wide, a medium, and then a tight, right? So a wide shot, kind of showing a lot of things. Maybe a medium shot showing something else, and then a tight shot showing a detail. So this tight shot, this thing right here, is, you know, very harken and very similar to things happening right here. So there's a lot of relationships between happening here and here, almost like we're zooming in and looking at details. Maybe we're looking at what the dog's looking at, right? So those are kind of a couple conceptual things going on and also a couple of aesthetic things going on. So just start to think about those as things that happen in between images. So as long as you're making at least one or two of those links, so compositional, conceptual, color, shape, maybe even light or movement, as long as you're making one or two of those links, it's a good transition. So for the next one, right, similar lighting pattern. So again, it's light from behind. What's happening nice between these three images is that the light starts in the top left, kind of moves into the middle, and now appears in the top right. So there's almost a scene going on, right? That the sun is rising and then setting. There's a small frame of time going on. And also the light's kind of appearing in a similar manner in motion. So not only do we have the similar subjects, we're dealing with time in really interesting ways and kind of bridging those gaps in some ways too. So that's how I'm kind of transitioning between those first three. So moving on to this image. So again, similar light. This is also a very strong kind of linear line photograph. So in the same way that we're using and kind of utilizing line to get to certain objects, there's a lot of lines being used in this photograph to get to looking around the frame as well. So lines not just on the fence going this way, the shadows, the trees, the buildings, the sun in the top right corner still. They're very similar photographs, again, how they're laid out. That's kind of what I'm pushing on. So but they're very different in subject matter. So anytime you want to make a big jump from subject matter, now again, these are all pretty organic shapes and objects, right? And suddenly I'm dealing with more of a urban kind of environment. So anytime you want to make a strong transition between subject matter, so natural to urban, or natural to man-made, you want to have some compositional strengths or compositional mirroring. So where the light's coming from, the position of it, the color of it, all those things are pretty similar, so we can make that jump pretty reasonably. And what this allows me to do is to introduce some new subjects, right? So I'm introducing some trashy wood stuff, some fences, some cars hidden behind things, some buildings. What that allows me to do is to make another harsh transition into something like this. So just in 2 images, I moved from, in the field to behind the dumpster to in my house. So the transition here is taking this strong triangular shape that's happening, that's kind of one of the center points of this composition, and using that as the other strong central point of the composition. So this shape, this building, is the same as this shape in this building, and I'm using that as a transition. So they can be really simple things like that kind of push these ideas forward, okay? So I'm just using those individual things and pushing them around. So again, these kind of images appearing on the same page are going to act a little bit differently because they're immediate relationships. So these images are taken at the same time, so they have that relationship. They have the same lighting, which is fantastic. They're also happening in the same spot. So they're using a lot of the same principles and a lot of the same light and kind of organized in those ways. They're very different compositions, but they're also using line in similar ways. So they're also building lines and building space, which is quite nice. But they have the exact same color scheme, which is putting them together pretty well. So I can kind of make some transitions from this home space. This is strictly conceptual and idea and subject-wise. Now these are far different in terms of how they're dealing with home space, but the subject is the same. So I'm able to transition into a home space here, and then I'm able to move into more difficult imagery, such as a still life, or even a more candid found still life, at least utilizing the same kind of domestic space. And here I can make a nice kind of color transition. So if we're looking at these 2 spots right here, so we have this kind of orange-green and this kind of green-blue. These same colors are appearing in this image right here. So we're kind of taking these 2 images and treating them as one, as a big transition into this next one. Okay. So I'm not going to go through the whole portfolio, but you can see how I'm making these relationships possible. Now in some of these I'm making some different relationships. I'd like you to try to figure out what they are. So that's how I move into this portfolio, and that's how I'd like you guys to think about yours as well. Now again, we'll be doing a first draft of these, so don't freak out if you're just not sure what to do. Look at the sample portfolio in here for some good ideas. Again, these are all images I made this semester, so I'm not really pulling anything out of the back line here to make these things happen. This is just a bunch of things I've made for you guys for examples. So all these should look familiar in terms of where they came from and why I made them. But I'm kind of recontextualizing them based on what's surrounding them. So if you have any questions about this, please email me or message me in Discord. I'll be available for you guys, obviously, whenever I can. And good luck. Hope you guys are enjoying this final portfolio. We are so close to the end, and I can't wait to see how things really wrap up. So far, I've just been really impressed with everything you guys are doing. So please keep it up. I know it's tough to work at home, but you guys are doing amazing work. So please keep going. We are almost there. So good luck. Thank you, and have fun.